I called the hospice and said, do you have a bereavement group that I can attend? And they said, oh yes, we do. And I said, who's part of the group? Who attends the session? She said, well, it's all women. And I said, well, I'm not sure that I could go to an all-women's group because Gretchen laid a caveat on me. And she said, well, what's the caveat? And Gretchen had told me that after she died, I couldn't accept casseroles with email addresses on them. So therefore, I couldn't attend an all-female group.
There was only one group in all these years where there were more men than women, but it usually is more women than men.
Most bereavement groups I've been to are like almost all women.
Occasionally there would be a guy who would come into the group and see that there were hardly any men and didn't come back. And
maybe guys are not normally known for being too expressive.
Most of them are hiding their feelings because that's the way they have lived and that's what they're used to. And it's hard for them to get out of their grief shell.
All I have is assumptions. You know, the stereotypes that men don't share emotionally, publicly, socially. Well, I didn't necessarily believe it until I went to bereavement groups, actually, and I don't see men, mostly. Too bad for them. I don't know how people process this grief.
I felt that I couldn't expose my feelings to a bunch of women, that we had a different viewpoint, and I guess I felt that I didn't want to lessen my macho feeling in a way. So instead I asked the head of hospice to give me names of some men whose wives had died recently. I called them and I had lunch with one at a time, and we cried together. It was surprising that I had a compatriot at the moment who felt the same way that I did, one of whom had attended the all-ladies group and was very uncomfortable. And I said, well, why don't we start meeting on a regular basis so we can share our feelings.
Group provided me with an environment where I could deal with other people who have shared similar losses. It wasn't specific to spousal loss. It was a group that was exclusive for men who have suffered loss. So some of them were there because they lost a parent, some because they lost a spouse, and I suppose there was a certain percentage of guys there that were gay that lost their partner. So it was a weird aggregate, I suppose, in the sense that I think spousal loss is specific, but it really did give me a venue to speak in a room full of guys.
And one of the richest grief experiences I've had has been with a man in our group whose wife died in her 40s. And his ability to process his grief in the group was transformational. He came to the group. The group met on what would have been their 25th wedding anniversary. Him coming to the group on his 25th wedding anniversary was such a witness to his own work, to the love he had for his wife, and to how much he was willing to be present to his loss and to the mystery, because he would have never, 25 years before that, have ever imagined that he'd be sitting in a grief group on the 25th anniversary of his marriage. He taught us so much.
A difference with the men's group is just the fact that there are all men together in the room, and they're comfortable just being able to express themselves however they express themselves, and not having to put on a brave face. I think there's kind of been metaphors about men, having to wear armor or whatever. Well, when they come into the room, they don't have to have their armor on. They can just be themselves, just be who they are, and express themselves however they want to.
But we started with a funny story and ended with a funny story. So, and in between, the dynamics were fascinating in that I had each person tell his story, and there was a similarity in each story, but there was a difference, and many of them became tearful or cried during the telling of the story. And since it was all confidential and with other guys to share the experience with, it seemed to work.
And it can be just a place for basic social support and social contact. There were some guys in the group that maybe their partner and their spouse was their primary relationship in their life. It's one of the differences, I think, between grief for men and for women. Women tend to have kind of a network of connections, a network of relationships around them. Men can be more isolated and exclusive in their relationships. So when their main relationship is no longer there, they're in essence all by themselves. And the relationships that they have in their life are fairly tangential. They're not very deep. They're not connected in that sense. So being able to go to a group can also serve just a social function as well.
For me, it was magical. I was able to tell my story and hear other people's stories that were just as well in it. And it was a very healing experience.
I think there's also a chance for them to talk about things that maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable talking about if there were women in the room, like dating or experiences with different women, or just things like that they can just feel free to just kind of let it all hang out and not feel like they're having to censor themselves for anyone. There's an old adage that says women mourn, men replace, but certainly from my experience in the men's group, the picture is more complex. And that men in general in the group tend to struggle a lot more and to say, I'm not ready, and I'm not sure when I'll be ready.
I think that it's difficult in that I knew a guy in the bereavement group that got engaged and married in less than a year.
Dad, it's too soon. It's almost a betrayal of our mother that you are in a relationship.
I just don't get how men wouldn't want to sort of get through the grief or try to communicate with friends, family, or social workers, bereavement counselors to process this and to try to understand where they are going in life.
All I know is that I was so lonely that I needed to grab a life preserver. And maybe they thought that I was grabbing the life preserver before I had tried to swim.
There are some guys that have come to the group that almost kind of want to go through an express lane and just kind of drink their grief like a shot of espresso and just get it all over with in one bitter swallow. But I think they find that doesn't really work in the long run. And there are some guys too that they'll try out dating, but their experience of dating lets them know that they're not ready. So they'll say it's okay to just wait and just kind of just go out for friendly social outings.
And part of the healing process might be having a new relationship. And whether the relationships can take all kinds of forms and formats. It can be dating, it can be traveling with someone can be a companion, it can be a friend, it can be a romance, it can be have all kinds of varieties.
There's I think a meetup group out on Long Island that's just kind of for people that just want to socialize with other people who are grieving, but they don't want to get involved in a serious relationship. So it's kind of like a place for people to just be where they're at and not feel like that they have to have that pressure of going out and dating. And then there are also situations with men who had been involved, they've been married for decades, and now to have to think about dating again or starting to have a relationship in this new age of internet and online dating, and how do I meet somebody? So there's a lot of struggles around that as well, and kind of new sense of etiquette. How does this whole dating thing works? When does it get physical? How do I know if I want to see someone again? How do I let someone down easy if I discover I don't want to pursue things any further? So in some ways, it can also bring some of these men back to their adolescence developmentally, that they're teenagers again, and they have this kind of sense of angst and drama, waiting for that reply, and also communicating with someone they're getting involved with in different ways. They didn't, when they were first getting involved with their partners or spouses, they weren't texting them.
So my advice to men is to talk to your children, boys and girls, and tell them where you are and how you feel and how you would like to move on with your healing process.
But just have a sense of knowing that they're not ready.
I think if you open up with your children and tell them where you are and what needs you are trying to fill in your life, then it might be easier. It didn't happen with me, but maybe it could have if I had been more open and more giving and more honest about how awful I felt. I assumed that they knew how I felt, but maybe their mourning and their bereavement was quite different from mine. It's so individualistic and so personal that you don't know how somebody else is reacting to their grief.
Now I'm engaged, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to get a second chance, and my fiancée, Ali, is wonderful. But it's difficult also because she knows in my heart the pain and the sadness. And I don't want to make that too obvious or evident for her, because I feel that wouldn't be fair. So I'm trying to negotiate these two lines, tightrope walking one line. So it's tough.